Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and this is my review of the Death Note franchise as of 2016. So this video will include my brief thoughts on the anime series, the theatrical films from the 2000s, the live-action television series from 2015, and the new theatrical film entitled Light Up the New World from 2016. Now I have not yet read the manga, but I definitely have plans to do so in the future. So I checked out the Light Up the New World film on a plane flight to Japan, or from Japan, and I figured I would just do a quick review of the whole franchise up to this point, because I'm a pretty big fan. Now, the first two theatrical films both came out in 2006, while the anime series began in 2006, but ended in 2007. So I'm going to cover the anime series first here, mostly because the anime covers more story than the live-action films. So these will be non-spoiler reviews, by the way. So what is the Death Note franchise about exactly, just in case you're unfamiliar with it? Well, there's basically two main characters here. There's a young man named Light Yagami, who is a genius student, and a young detective who calls himself L, who is a genius in his own right. So one day, Light discovers a death note that was dropped to Earth by a Shinigami, a god of death named Ryuk. So the death note works kind of like this. You write the name of a person in the notebook, and that person dies. So confronted with this fantastic new power, Light decides to cleanse the world of crime by eliminating criminals who are not sufficiently punished by legitimate conventional laws and trials. So after continuing to murder these criminals by the boatload, his actions catch the attention of the media and authorities, who simply cannot figure out how this godlike vigilante is executing these people. And eventually, the genius detective L takes on the case and vows to bring Light to justice. So what I enjoy most about the Death Note property overall is the cat and mouse games between Light and L. And the reason for this is because the Death Note has very specific rules and limitations for its use. So for example, you need to picture the person's face in your mind while you write their name in the book in order to kill them. I mean, this is necessary because many people have the same name. So picturing their face in your mind provides the necessary specification for the Death Note to work properly. Another example, if you just write a person's name down, they'll die of a heart attack. But you can also specify a different cause of death as necessary, which can help to cover up your crime. So these rules create a situation where Light has certain restrictions and powers that allows for the opportunity of him getting caught. So our genius detective L withholds his name and face for a while, which means that Light cannot kill him with the Death Note, at least initially. So there's this constant chess match between the two, and I really love that aspect of this franchise, but it does require some fantastic script writing to pull off. So let's get to my mini reviews here. The first of which is Death Note the anime from 2006 and 2007 technically. Now this anime series is 37 episodes long, 22 minutes each. A little bit longer than the anime that I usually watch, which typically range from 10 to 26 episodes in length. But that's not necessarily a problem here because this is very interesting stuff. So the anime does a great job of showcasing the cat and mouse interaction that I enjoy so much. The animation itself is of a good quality, and there are some visuals that the anime provides that would be difficult to pull off in live action. It's also nice to have the storyline progress for such a sustained period of time, which is much longer than one or two theatrical films. So you get a very nice dose of Death Note awesomeness in this anime. But I will say, however, that there are some negatives to the anime, in my opinion. First, I felt like some of the plot developments were a little bit gimmicky and overblown. Like there's some physical fighting, a tennis match, a foot washing scene, kind of a plane hijacking, a money waterfall. These things might not mean anything to you if you haven't seen the anime, but it's just some of these elements just were a bit too much. Like, the fact that you have two geniuses as your two leads is ridiculous enough, but having them be world-class athletes and fighters at the same time is kind of lame and forced. You know what I mean? And do I really need to get into that foot washing scene? If you've seen the anime, I mean, come on, man. That was, I don't know. I was shaking my head at that one. So there are a few eye-rolling moments in the anime, which are also kind of entertaining at the same time, though. Also, I did find that some of the subplots made the storyline feel a bit muddled and unfocused. There's actually another genius. Yes, another genius. Who I won't even say the name of this person, just in case you'd consider it a spoiler. But I must say that the Light and L conflict is far more interesting than any of the subplots or other characters. And so I can't help but feel that the series dips a little bit in entertainment value when it shifts to some of these other characters. But with that said, the anime is still very solid, and I strongly recommend it. Now, if you compare the anime to the two theatrical films in terms of story, the anime starts off basically identical to the theatrical films from 2006, but diverges in a number of ways later on. I have in my notes that episodes 7 and 17 to 37 have significant variances. So really, up until you get to the end of episode 16, everything's pretty much mirrors the theatrical films. And then you have a whole different set of things that happen in the anime that either do not happen in the theatrical films or happen differently. So, even though there's some overlap, there's a lot of differences. So it really benefits to watch all of the Death Note properties because you'll get something different with each of them. And speaking of the theatrical films, those films are Death Note and Death Note: The Last Name, which act kind of like one big film that's split in half. So you really need to watch both. There was also a film called L Change the World that was released in 2008, but I personally do not even consider it to be part of this particular franchise because there are no Death Notes in that film at all. It's more of a spin-off prequel with L investigating an unrelated case. That movie stinks, by the way, so I definitely do not recommend it. And you don't need to watch it to, if you're a fan of the Death Note franchise, you don't even need to watch it because there's no Death Notes in it. But with regard to Death Note and Death Note: The Last Name, they focus again on the conflict between Light and L, like the anime. They also touch upon a variety of themes as well. Let me just, I have a bit of a cold here. I'm pushing through here for you. So number one, there's a theme of a powerful form of vigilante justice versus the imperfect rules of law and trial. So almost like a Dirty Harry concept. Do you abide by the imperfect rules of law and trial, or do you go the vigilante route and do your own thing? There's that theme. Second, it's kind of a study on the effects of power on the individual person. The corruption of power. Power corrupts. So that's in here. And then also, there's a reflection on the use of mass media to expose criminals. So you do have some different themes here that makes this interesting, and these themes are also in the anime as well. The second film, though, the second live-action film in particular, really ramps up the complexity of Death Note use to another level by adding multiple threats and characters. So, the highlight of basically the entire franchise for me is a very elaborate strategy by both characters, Light and L, that unfolds over the course of the last hour of Death Note: The Last Name. And it really is like watching two chess masters who plan 10 moves ahead. And it'll take some thought on the viewer's part to piece everything together and work out in their minds exactly how these Death Note tactics were executed. And, that's what makes these films so thought-provoking, with very sharply written and intelligent screenplays. So I think that's really what sets these films apart from a lot of other movies. And it's one of the reasons why they're really two of my favorite films of all time. Now, the three actors in these two live-action films are Tetsuya Fujiwara, Kenichi Matsuyama, and Erika Toda. Now, Fujiwara in particular has grown on me quite a bit over the last decade. At first, I wasn't really all that big on him when I watched Battle Royale, but films like Parade and the Death Note films have shown that he can impress in some, lower key roles. I know that some of his most vocal critics usually point to his more histrionic performances like Battle Royale or Shield of Straw, but I even kind of liked him in those movies as well after I rewatched them. So his style of acting is definitely a little bit on the theatrical side, but as long as the quality of film around him is good, it doesn't really bother me that much. But on the other hand, his acting can get grating when he appears in crappy films like 1/3 and The Insight Mill. With regard to Matsuyama, I think that he's kind of hit or miss. I liked him in the Death Note films, Detroit Metal City, and Don't Laugh at My Romance. I did not like him in the Gantz movies, L Change the World, or Bare Essence of Life. So, kind of hit or miss there. For the Death Note films, he does a very good job, I think, at portraying L. Very quirky performance, but he pulls it off. So I got to give him credit for that. Erika Toda is good as usual. I like her in almost everything she's in. I did find her performance as Misa in the live-action films to be better than the character in the anime. She kind of ratcheted down the over-the-top nature of the character and portrayed her obsession with light in a more realistic and relatable manner. So I appreciated that. And I guess I just have to say right now that Ryuk is freaking awesome, okay? The featured Shinigami. Every moment he's on screen is just pure entertainment value. And even despite the fact that these live-action films create him with some really low-grade CGI, like when you first see him, you're like, wow, it almost looks like a video game. Video game spliced into live action. But very quickly, I just forget about it because his character is so amazing. So it's, he's awesome. Also, I have to mention that these films were directed by Shuzuke Kaneko, who is a master of the kaiju film, the contemporary kaiju film at least, and has shown, that he can branch out and contribute some classics in other genres. So to sum up the films from 2006, and I'm kind of in the minority in this opinion, I think, based on what I've seen on message boards, but I really actually think that the theatrical films are superior to the anime because they focus on the best elements, Light versus L. They ignore the less interesting elements and subplots of the anime, and they efficiently execute them in the most entertaining way possible. So, if you go back to my criticisms of the anime that I mentioned earlier, the live-action films successfully avoid most of those flaws. And, I've seen these films dozens of times, and I will continue to relentlessly rewatch them into the future. So, now we fast forward 9 years to 2015, when someone decided to resurrect this franchise in the form of a live-action television series that is 11 episodes long, 45 minutes each. Actually, the first episode is 80 minutes long. It's like a big introduction. So it follows, again, the previous movies and anime in basic concept, with an emphasis on Light versus L again. Now, a lot of people on the internet poo-poo this show like it's some kind of hideous atrocity. But, it's not as good as the anime, and it's not as good as the previous theatrical films from 2006 that we covered. But I did find it to be a moderately entertaining television show. So what did I actually like about the show? Well, it continues to focus heavily on Death Note use, as well as the limitations of using it. Now, some new methods are introduced in the show to test the notebook's power as well, which I found to be interesting. It's another way of exploring things. Now, it does play out in a similar fashion to its predecessors, but it also changes the specific scenarios in significant ways to keep things fresh and different. It's not a carbon copy adaptation. So there are many times where it will lead to a point you're familiar with, and then it'll throw a curveball that changes the outcome. And it does this a lot. So I liked that. Light, it's almost, let me just say this quickly, is that I think this show almost assumes that you've seen the anime and the previous theatrical films, because it leads you in a similar road, and then, like I said, it throws you those curveballs. I think it's better to watch this show after you've seen those other properties, those other media. Now, Light is not a pure genius in this show. He exhibits some weaknesses and mistakes even early on. Near the beginning, it almost seems like he's outmatched by L. And some may think that it's a betrayal of his character, which is a reasonable criticism. But I found it to be kind of a nice change-up that, again, distinguishes the show from its predecessors. Another thing I enjoyed is that Ryuk is nuttier than ever and an absolute riot. He's given tons of screen time during the first handful of episodes, and you can't get enough Ryuk. He's great. But there are flaws to the show. So what did I dislike about the show? Well, Ryuk disappears near the midpoint and only returns a few times after that, which is very disappointing. It's almost like the producers were scared of using him too much. Listen, you can't use Ryuk too much. It's impossible. Heck, they should make a Death Note film or television series from his perspective. I would totally watch it, and it would probably be awesome. The acting in the show is a bit uneven, and even soap opera-ish at times. I was not a fan of the lead actor who played Light in this show, Masataka Kubota, who was very kind of stiff and awkward. I don't know, I just didn't like him, man. The actor who played L, Kento Yamazaki, did a much better job. I did like him. And similar to the anime, the secondary plot lines of the TV series do not work as well as the primary story, and that kind of hurts the later episodes. Also, the resolutions to some of the conflicts also felt a bit anticlimactic. So overall, I would say the live-action television series was pretty good. I enjoyed it, but it has its flaws. And again, I would recommend that you watch the live-action films and the anime first. And then if you want a little bit more Death Note, I would say check out the TV series. Although some people really dislike it. A lot of people dislike it. So finally, we come to the most recent live-action film, Death Note: Light Up the New World, from 2016. Excuse me. Which, again, I saw on a plane flight from Japan, or to Japan. So the plot goes something like this. 10 years after the confrontation between Light and L, the Shinigami have now released 6 Death Notes into the world. One successor to Light attempts to retrieve them all, while the successor to L attempts to stop him. So this is really the first Death Note property that attempts to push the story forward and move on from the story that we've seen readapted over the past decade. And I think it does a pretty good job at what it sets out to do here. Now, what I liked most were the effective performances and interesting conflicts. The actors in this were better than I was expecting. They looked a bit iffy in the Japanese trailers for some reason, but everybody I think did a pretty solid job in this. I liked everyone. The execution is different from its predecessors because it operates as more of a conventional thriller, where the Death Note users are not geniuses. So, again, a nice change of pace because it gets kind of tiring and ridiculous when, like, everybody who gets a Death Note is like, just so happens to be a genius. So I kind of liked how you had everyday people using it this time. Ryuk has some very fun moments near the end. And not that it matters much, but the CGI effects are better than the 2006 films. Again, special effects don't matter quite as much to me. Sometimes they take me out of a film, but, like I said, in the 2006 films, the lower grade CGI didn't bother me at all. Now, in terms of negatives for Light Up the New World, there's one big one, okay, that I need to point out. The cat and mouse tactics of the previous films and anime, as well as the specifics of Death Note use, are de-emphasized in this movie, which is a disappointment that creates a more simplistic affair. So what I mean by this is that, although the Death Notes are used a lot in the movie, most of the tactics are very simplistic heart attack deaths, with no complex strategies behind the use of these notes. So you're not going to get that chess match style, thinking 10 moves ahead extravaganzas that made the 2006 films so memorable. Those films provided very detailed information on how exactly the Death Notes worked. So much so that it provokes the viewer to think of how they would use it if they had it in their possession. So Light Up the New World does not get into that level of detail regarding Death Note use, and I found that to be the most disappointing aspect of the film. But still, as a different take on this subject, Light Up the New World is entertaining enough, I think. I feel like I would need to see it a second time in order to make a final determination on my opinions, because not because it's complex, but because it tries something different that I wasn't really expecting, with the Death Note use. Caught me a little bit by surprise there. It does set up a sequel, and I do kind of hope that they take that opportunity to dig back into the details of Death Note use if they decide to make a sequel. But again, I did enjoy Light Up the New World. Kind of a different spin on this, and I liked it. It was good. So the Death Note franchise overall, very interesting and creative one to explore if you haven't already. Again, the 2 live-action films from 2006 are phenomenal in my opinion. The anime series is widely beloved, and rightfully so. And even the weaker adaptations that we covered I think are worth watching, despite their flaws. So in terms of availability, anime series and the live-action films are all widely available on DVD and Blu-ray. The live-action television series is available streaming on Crunchyroll. Light Up the New World is currently available on Yes Asia in Region 3 format with English subtitles. It's the Hong Kong release. The Japanese release, which is Region 2, does not have subs, so be careful. So, there you have it. Those are my thoughts on Death Note. If I really wanted to go into like a spoiler thing, I probably could go on for hours. I love these films and this whole franchise. So, if you haven't checked them out, check them out. And as always, I will see you next time.